Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to unravel China's incredibly complex education system, but we're going to do it by telling the stories of three different fathers. Their lives, you'll see, reveal a system of immense pressure, deep division, and in some cases, absolute control.
So let's start with a puzzle. We're in a high-rise apartment in Shanghai. A father is paying a mortgage so huge it's more than the cost of a whole house in most countries. But he's not just buying a place to live. No, he's buying his daughter a future.
Now picture this, a construction site, same city. Another father is 60 stories up, welding steel beams. Almost every penny he earns gets sent back home, to a daughter he sees maybe once a year.
And for our last story, we go to China's far west. Here, a third father waits until night, and then, in hushed tones, he teaches his son the words that his school is actively trying to make him forget.
So you've got three fathers, right? They're all completely focused on their kids' education, but they are living in entirely different worlds. So the big question is, how can one single national system create three such separate realities?
Well, the best way to wrap your head around it is to think of it as a metaphor, ladders. For the Shanghai father, his ladder is basically gilded with gold. For the migrant worker, his is broken, completely unstable. And for the Uyghur father, well, it isn't a ladder at all. It's a cage. To understand how these ladders got built, we've got to look at the history.
This system wasn't built overnight. It was forged over centuries. In its history, it just swings wildly back and forth between this dream of a pure meritocracy and the harsh reality of absolute state control. For over 1,000 years, China has been wrestling with the power of a single test. First, you had this ancient imperial exam that promised greatness to anyone who could pass it. Then, a revolution that tried to smash that whole idea. And finally, its modern revival, the Gaokao, which brought back the dream, but this time surrounded it with invisible walls.
So where does this obsession with a single test even come from? It all goes back to the Koju. For centuries, this unbelievably tough exam was the only way to get power and status. It burned this idea into the culture that your entire life could hang on one score, an idea that is very, very much alive today.
And then you have this, the complete counterpoint to that dream of merit, the hukou. You can think of it as an internal passport that literally ties you to where you were born. It was created to control the population, but its effect today is to create this invisible wall, locking millions of people out of the good schools and opportunities in the big cities.
Okay, so with that history in our back pocket, let's get back to our three fathers. Let's see exactly how the pressure of the Gaokao exam and the walls of the hukou system play out in their daily lives.
First, we're back in Shanghai. This father, he's part of the urban elite. And for him, the education system is just this relentless, non-stop race. He lives in a world where just being good doesn't cut it anymore. Excellent is the new baseline.
And this number just perfectly illustrates the price of admission to that race. Almost $2 million for an apartment. Not for the view, not for the space, but for the address. That address guarantees his daughter a place in a top school. He calls it tuition prepaid through concrete.
So for this father, the system isn't really about climbing up. It's about not falling down. He uses his money to buy every possible advantage in what everyone calls an arms race against other wealthy parents, all to make sure his daughter stays right where she is, on that golden ladder.
Okay, now let's talk about the migrant worker, the man literally building the city. For him, that same ladder of opportunity is supposed to exist, but in his words, every single rung is greased by geography and paperwork.
This number, 1,500 kilometers, this is the brutal human cost of the hukou system. Because his registration says he's from a rural area, his daughter is barred from enrolling in the very city schools he helps build. So the price of her education back home is their life together.
His daughter is one of an estimated 60 million left behind children in China. That's a whole generation growing up without their parents, separated not by choice, but by a government policy. His ladder isn't just shaky. It was designed to be broken. And finally, we go to the Uyghur father in Xinjiang. For him and his son, the education system isn't about opportunity. It isn't about mobility. It's a tool of erasure. And things really came to a head in 2017. That's the year a state policy came down that effectively banned his native Uyghur language from being used to teach in the classroom.
Almost overnight, school became a place where children were taught to replace their own culture with the one mandated by the state.
So for his son, the ladder isn't broken, it's a cage. To succeed in this system, you have to pass through checkpoints of political loyalty and constant surveillance. And the price of climbing higher is forgetting your own language, your history, basically your identity. So let's just take a step back and put these three experiences right next to each other. When you do that, the deep, systemic divisions become impossible to miss. This, right here, is the central conflict of the entire system. On one side, you have the promise, the national myth of meritocracy, where the Gaokao exam means anyone can succeed. But on the other side, you have the cold, hard reality of the hukou system, where you're born is often way more important than how hard you work. And this table really just boils it all down. For the Shanghai elite, the main goal is to preserve their status, and their biggest fear is mediocrity. For the migrant worker, the goal is hope, and the fear is being trapped forever. And for the Uyghur parent, the goal is survival, and the fear is forgetting. One sees the state as setting a hard game, another sees it creating barriers, and the third sees it as a force of absolute control.
So what's the ultimate price of the climb? We've seen one system create a gilded ladder, a broken ladder, and a cage. What's the real consequence of all this?
You know, in the end, this isn't just about test scores or getting ahead. It's about the profound human cost when a nation's promise of opportunity gets distributed so unequally. And it forces us to ask a much, much bigger question. What does any society, anywhere, truly owe its children?